Hello, and thank you for joining me today. I'm here to talk a little bit about engineering with social purpose. So I'm just going to share my screen because I've got a set of slides to show. There we go. So there we go. My name is Charlie Barnes and I work for UK Power Networks. And I guess to start off, a little bit about me. As I said, my name is Charlie. I am 29 years old and I identify as a non-binary woman. My career is, I just say engineer because honestly, it's kind of an identity for me at this point. It's something that's really important to me, how I associate myself with being an engineer, with thinking and acting like an engineer. It's something that is not just my job, it's like my way of kind of being, I suppose. So it's really important to me. When I'm not engineering, my kind of interests outside of work is film. I'm a big Marvel fan, other kind of more artsy things. I really love cooking, especially baking. And lots of other kind of tasty desserts, cakes, things like that. And I'm a really passionate feminist, so I spend a lot of time reading around feminism and philosophy and just kind of understanding concepts like that. I'm a real kind of nerd in for equality and more kind of things like that, and I apply it kind of through my job. So I guess to start off with, the big question is, why engineering? Why do people pick that? Why do they do it? Why is it important? For me, the ability to kind of point at something and go, I made that, I did that myself, is really important to me. And so this started quite young for me. I was about 11 years old and something called Neopets was really popular. I don't know, the website's still around. Don't know if it's something that people play nowadays. And I had a little Neopet that was called a Catcheat. I can't remember its specific name. But on this website, it was like a little Tamagotchi. You could feed it, give it treats or clothes or decorate its little house. But one of the things you could do was to design a web page for it. And there were competitions and people had really cool pages. And I just thought, I want to do that. I don't just want a little house. I want a really cool website. To do that, however, I had to teach myself a programming language called HTML. And I soon learned another one called CSS. So there's a sample of it here. And it was something that I started off slow and steady and just taught myself in my spare time and had fun making a website. I got to admit, it was the 90s. It was looking a little bit more like this, which is not that aesthetic to today's standards. But honestly, I was really proud because it was something that I could point at and say, I made that. It was this instant, I could type in a line of code, press save, go and view the web page. And there was something that I had created out there in the world, which I thought was really impressive and really liked that aspect of it. The other thing I really enjoy about engineering is you're constantly learning. So as I said, from my journey, starting off learning how to make websites, initially it was just putting text on the page and changing the colors and putting a background, but I wanted to do something cool. I wanted it to look better. So I did things like learning how to put a table in. So you can see a sample here and it looks pretty nice, but there's some colors, but it's quite square. It's not very pretty. So something I learned was how to change the corners of the square. Now, that might sound like the easiest thing in the world. If you're doing it, on a computer in Microsoft Word, you just click a button and it can change. On HTML at the time, you couldn't do that. You had to create separate pictures for each of the kind of little rounded corners, drop them onto that kind of corner, each one, and then line it up with the table with a load of extra code. Honestly, it was such a faff. It took ages. So I was super proud that I managed to do that. But engineering is always changing, and that's why you constantly need to learn to kind of keep up with what's the latest kind of technology, what's the latest kind of standards, processes. So actually, since then, I've learned that HTML has been updated. There's a new version out called HTML5. And now they have a simple line of code and you can say, make those corners round, please. And it saves so much time because an engineer spotted that problem and fixed it. And during little 11-year-old me is so proud because that would have saved me so much time as a kid. And I'm so glad it's out there now. So as I've said, there's a lot of kind of problem solving in this. And that's one of the other things I really enjoy about engineering. It's this really creative way of tackling something. So an example of this is at university, I studied electronic engineering, which electronics is kind of small scale devices. So like laptops, phones, things that are quite little and kind of almost, it's called digital. So, more computery like. And one of my courses I took, because I really like the name, was called Biologically Inspired Robots, which, that just sounds exciting. So the challenge we got set is pick a challenge yourself and think of a way that you can create a robot that could solve it using nature as a biological inspiration. So me and my team were talking, and one thing that's sadly prevalent, it shouldn't be, is littering, all over the world. As you can see here, just beaches, after people have been out in the day, there's just litter thrown everywhere, but it's all different shapes and sizes. Sometimes it's dangerous to pick up litter if you don't do it safely, you don't know what's there. So could we solve this problem somehow? What could we do that's interesting? So we were inspired by an animal called the hermit crab, which, if you haven't heard of it, I really say it's worth a Google. There's really interesting YouTube videos of facts out there. The interesting thing about the hermit crab is they usually live in shells, or as you can see here, it's got a little tin can. They don't make their own shells. They just find them anywhere. So that means that sometimes they don't use shells. They end up using other pieces of even litter to basically create their own home. And it's amazing how they manage that, and how their body, as it grows, it kind of has a certain way of shaping to grow and curve and fit into whatever kind of size of container it is, which that sounds like a really good engineering idea to me. What better way to pick something up by understanding how to fit into it and then using that to kind of securely grasp it. So we built a robot, and I'm just gonna show you a video. Here we go. So this was my team's biologically inspired robot. We first modeled it on the computer to understand how the arms would open and close. As you can see, it's got little tank tracks there, so it could kind of move backwards and forwards. One of the fun things is we had a 3D printer at uni, so we had to print everything. And then we basically printed these little molds that you can see here and poured rubber solution into them. Because one of the problems we had with the early prototypes was plastic doesn't grip things very well, but rubber does. So we realized if we made little rubber arms to fit into the equipment, it would help grip it a little bit more securely. So as you can see here, here's some testing videos I made at the time, which showed how the rubber kind of flexed and moved and how grippy it was, so that we could attach it onto the ends of the little arms so they would open and close. There's an early one without the rubber. So as you can see, it wasn't that effective. Whereas when we made it with the rubber later, it was a lot grippier. It could grab things a lot better. And as you can see here, it picked things up, and we basically wrote code to tell it to open until it hits something and goes, oh, there's something there. Don't break it. It might be delicate. So it could carry things like glasses, and it could move around. So we could send our little robot out into the world, and it would go up and pick up litter, no matter kind of what size, and bring it back. So that was a really fun project, and I really enjoyed working on it. And it was just really cool to be able to, I think, creatively and solve that problem in a really interesting way, which for me, as I said, is so important in engineering. And finally, for me, so much of engineering is about helping people. It's something I'm really passionate about personally. And as I said, building on everything else, if you can learn something new, think of a really cool way to apply it, go and make it something and point it and go, I made that, and it helps people, that ticks all the boxes for me. So an example of this is after university, I went to work for a bus company in London, and they basically used to manage the buses. So they'd maintain the buses, and then they'd go out on the road and the drivers would drive them so that people could catch them. I worked with the engineering team, so we were dealing with thousands of buses and had to maintain them all consistently and keep track of what work we did where. Now, the manager at the time, he wasn't a big fan of computers, so he used to keep handwritten lists of all the buses that we used to fix and how much work we'd done on them and how much it cost. And then at the end of every month, he'd go all the way back through it and add it all up. Now, I don't know if you guys have ever done that, especially for hundreds of lines of numbers. It's not easy, it's not quick, and you're likely to make mistakes. No one's enjoying that. So I came up with a solution that saved him and his team time and also made sure it's a lot more accurate. So I'm not sure how many of you here have heard of Google Forms. If not, Google it and go and have a look. It's a really interesting tool where you can create your own form or questionnaire and put in all different types of questions and then gather the responses however you want. So it's a really powerful tool, simple but effective. So I literally set his team up with this form so that each of the team members, if they spent, an hour fixing bus 99, they could fill in the form and say, I worked on that bus for an hour and fixed this on it, and press it on the button, it's gone. The form's taken it away. It put those numbers into a spreadsheet on the other end. And I use the spreadsheet to not only add up the different totals, but actually do some additional maths to calculate how much it cost the company or how much they were saving. And it ended up saving so much time and making it so much easier. And I was just so pleased I could really help that manager. It made such a big impact on his team, and it was a cool project to run. And I made that difference. I really helped them. So as I kind of said, I worked for a bus company after I graduated from university, which was not what most people were expecting. As I said, my degree was in electronic engineering. That's mostly phones, small computers. How did I go to big smelly diesel buses? Well, the reason I picked transport is, first of all, because it was hands-on. As part of the graduate scheme, I got to spend time actually on the tools, fixing and maintaining the buses. There's a photo you can see of me there that is changing the wheel on one of the coaches. So they're even bigger than car tires. Next time you see a coach go past, they are massive, and there's a lot of heavy nuts and bolts to kind of keep them fixed on. So it was interesting to get my hands dirty and actually get involved and do that. And I really, really loved that part of my job. One of the other things was variety. As I said, I worked in London. So if you think about how many different people there are in London, so many things going on all the time, so many different types of people, you end up having some really strange things happen, which keeps it fun, keeps it exciting, but constantly keeps you on your toes. So we found some bizarre things on buses. Someone actually once forgot their snake on the bus for some reason. And so they had to find it at the garage and safely take it off the bus. And other things such as happening, which wasn't quite as fun. When I was managing one of the bus depots, one of my supervisors ran in, and he was looking very, very upset. And I went, "What's wrong with you?" And he said, 3 people today have done poops on buses. 3 people. And because any poops are a biohazardous material, we can't allow them to stay in service. What we need to do is take the bus off the road and make sure it's properly cleaned before anyone else can take it out. So that involves a lot of people, calling up the driver, working out what's wrong, taking a bus out to the driver so other passengers can continue the journey, and bringing the bus back, and then cleaning and fixing anything we need to. So I don't know what happened to those people that day, but it caused a huge effort at work because we suddenly had to find 3 extra buses and send them out to go and help people. And when I started the day, I didn't think that was going to be a conversation I'd have. There were so many other exciting things I got to do as well as being on the tools. There's the other photo of me there. I'm actually sat driving what's called an old Route Master bus. So they were mostly in London. I think they were really big in the 60s through to about the 90s. There's still some running in London on what's called a heritage route in central London. But they're gorgeous old buses that aren't automatic with very different gears. So it's totally different to drive and a really cool experience. Driving buses are really fun, I will say. A lot harder than a car because they're a lot bigger, but nice and fun. So it was really cool. I got the opportunity to actually do that as well. And the final one was the job was in London. I really like travel. I like new places. I like busy places. So the opportunity to move to London and work here was just really exciting for me. So those were the 3 reasons why I thought, yeah, this job is the one I want, and that's the direction I'm going. So I ended up staying in transport for many years, and it wasn't for the same reasons I kind of joined. And it was interesting how my perception of it kind of changed as I went. So the 3 things that I'm now really fond of the industry and were really the reasons why I kind of got up in the morning and went to work. It was what my drive was that it was people focused. My job involved a lot of social purpose, and it was a real time of change in the industry and the world. So what do I mean by that? There's so many different people that I kind of worked with around buses, because so many people, when they think buses, they think, oh, there's a bus driver. But no, there's so many more people behind it that keep it going. So this is actually a photo of me with the fire brigade, because sometimes when there's faults on the buses, they can end up catching fire on the roads. And it's really important that fire brigades know how to safely get people off the buses and put the fires out. And with the transition to electric buses, we had to give them specific training so they knew how different electric buses were to standard diesel buses. So it was really cool to engage with them, learn all about what the fire brigade do, and teach them about what we did. There's also a lot of kind of interesting hours and people on different shifts. So the bus industry, especially in London, never sleeps because there's 24-hour bus service. So it was great getting out really early in the morning. I can't deny some really hard starts at like 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, but it meant you sometimes got absolutely gorgeous sights of, you know, a full bus garage with all the vehicles in it, just a few people running around doing their jobs, and sometimes really nice weather. And it was just really interesting to go and kind of see that and see these people that, fair play to them, they get up every single day at 3, 4 o'clock in the morning to make sure those first buses leave on time. You also get some, as I said, really bizarre things happening. So this is a photo of a bus that managed to drive under a bridge that was too short for it, and it kind of pushed it onto one side. The bus actually was in service, but no one was hurt, luckily. And it's just another one of those things where you don't think about all the bizarre things that happen, all the people that get involved in something like this, because you need to make sure the passengers and the driver is okay. You need to get engineers out to understand what's wrong with the bus, how can we move it? Especially if anything's hit, like a bridge, you need to call the right people and tell them. There's so many different people interlocking and doing a good job to make sure everything works. And finally, the kind of most important people are the customers, the people that are getting on your buses, and you need to make sure that they feel safe and have a good and comfortable journey. So there's a lot of thought and design that goes into this. So this photo is actually of the back of 2 seats on a brand new electric bus I was on a while ago, and they actually have wireless charging in the back of the seats, as well as the shape of a phone holder. So as you can see there, you can pop your phone in and actually sit and watch something on the bus while it's charging your phone, which I think is really cool. And I really hope they roll them out onto even more buses, because, you know, who doesn't need that? So as I said, there's so many people you consider, excuse me, in transport. And so it's really important when you're thinking about the customer and what you can do, you've got to think, who uses it? Who's going to be getting on that bus today? And we've got to make sure that they have a nice time. So a lot of people, especially when they think buses or trains or transport, they think commuters. They think a man in a suit who's, you know, going to get on in the morning, go to work and come home again. But there's so many more people than that. There's people with different abilities, people with different jobs. You know, the pandemic, it was really important that people could get where they needed to go, even, especially the essential workers. Many people catch it to school or to visit family or friends of all different ages and abilities. It's really important that you remember the broad scope of all the people you're helping and make sure you consider what they might need when they're catching the bus, not just what you might need when you're catching the bus, because everyone's very different. So this ties into the kind of social purpose. I think it's really important. Diversity is really important, because I think that if you're designing something for an end customer, you need to have that reflected in the company. You know, you can't be psychic. You can't know necessarily what other people need. So if you have a diverse team with different ideas, you're more likely to get that kind of different ideas that are going to cater to all those different customers. So as I said, so many people think of a kind of man going to work as the typical person using transport, whereas actually there's far more complex ways that people use it, and it's understanding those different ways that they do that you can make sure that the transport system is fit for purpose and that people do use it, especially as we want people to use less cars now and use more public transport. If it's not a convenient journey, they're not going to use it. So a really good example of this is something called trip chaining, which is the idea that you go to several places on kind of one journey, not just from home to work. So as you can see here, I've got a slightly different example to compare. So historically as well, women tend to have more kind of different jobs they do, as well as a kind of like their main kind of income. They do different tasks around the house to support the family. So they might do childcare. They might have to drop their kid off in the morning at play school or nursery, and then they go into work. But after work, they don't go straight home. Maybe they need to go and pick up some groceries or do some food shopping. And then on the way, maybe they'll stop and check on grandma and check she's okay. And then they go home. So that's a very different journey to someone just going from A to B. It's taking into account all these different places they might stop, how frequent the buses are, and where they go. So that's why I think diversity is really important. And then until you get more people saying, wait a second, I don't just go from home to work or home to school, I actually do this. How are you going to get people designing something that everyone is going to use? And finally, one of the things I really enjoyed about the bus industry is now is such a time of change, and it's really, really important. Everyone's talking about net zero and climate change. There was the COP26 climate conference last year. It's really, really important now that people buy into this and help with the transition to net zero. But that's a really important job for engineers specifically, because someone needs to design those products. They need to make it, test it, and make things that work so that other people can use them. So the bus industry was a really good example of this. Lots of people love the idea of electric vehicles or hydrogen powered vehicles, but it's a new technology. It works in a slightly different way. And you need people to understand how it works to build something that's fit for purpose and make sure that it can do what it needs to do. So there's a photo of me. We're ready for the climate conference. My company wanted to prove people shouldn't be worried about electric vehicles, because so many people worry about, oh no, what if I run out of charge halfway to where I'm going? What if my car just stops in the middle of the road? So we wanted to prove that actually technology is getting better all the time. Batteries are getting more efficient and larger, and so they can carry you further and you don't need to worry. To prove this, we took an electric bus, this nice big blue one, all the way from London to Glasgow, which was a trip of over 1,000 miles, because we didn't make it so easy on ourselves and go direct. We stopped off at loads of other different places along the way, in part just to show off our really cool bus, but also to stop off and meet other towns and cities and organizations that were doing really important things on the net zero journey, whether it was buying more electric buses of their own in the town or implementing more projects such as solar panels and wind farms. You know, it was a real kind of journey of talking about what everyone's doing with technology to really drive that change and help make the difference to the climate. So I kind of see it as now's a really important time to be in this space and be driving that change, coming up with really good ideas and making this happen. Another thing I just wanted to mention from my time working on the buses was an organization called Women in Transport. The bus industry is still quite male dominated, especially older white men. So it's not as common. You see lots of other female faces around. So I joined this organization to kind of go and, you know, have some familiarity, to make new friends, meet people that were similar to me, and share my experiences and hear about theirs. So I think it's really important that no matter what space you're in, it's really good to kind of find who your allies are and find people that you have a lot in common and go and make new friends and engage with them, because it's all about sharing positive experiences and making, yeah, as I said, making new friends. So if there's any organizations in any kind of area that you choose to go in, it's always worth looking at them, even if it's before you get into the workplace. Some organizations like this might be able to support you as students or when you're studying. It's just good to reach these people because they're there to help at the end of the day, and these organizations do some fantastic things. So I did a massive change, to be honest, from the buses just over about 6 months ago now. And I changed from working in the transport industry to the energy sector. And so I now work for a company called UK Power Networks. And what we do is we run the electricity to grid in this orange area here, which is London and the southeast of England. So the electricity grid is basically all the cables that take the power from the power stations to your home. And it's all the cables and all the substations and all the technical stuff that needs to get that electricity from A to B. So as you can see here, it's about 8.3 million homes and businesses that UK Power Networks brings that power to every day. If you live in that area, then we definitely bring your power to you. And it's a really important thing, as I'm sure you recognize, that we do get that power to you. It's got to be uninterrupted. No one wants a power cut. No one wants to struggle. So we've got to do our best to maintain everything and make sure it keeps everything running. This means we have a huge amount of power, a total of up to 16 gigawatts at peak, which peak means when the most amount of power you're going to need in a day. So typically at the moment, it's sort of early evening because it's when people go home, they finish their job, and there's a little peak because everyone turns on the kettle, whacks on the telly, maybe puts the oven on, start cooking dinner, and suddenly all that electricity is needed at all these different homes all over the area. So we need to make sure that it can handle what's called this peak demand, and this network doesn't just stop working because too many people want power at the same time. So as I said earlier, social purpose is really important to me. So part of the reason I joined UK Power Networks is, as a company, they really align with my personal values. You know, it's not just my day-to-day job that's important, it's the company I work for. And they're really passionate about being a respected corporate citizen, which means, doing our bit for our communities in the area we work, and including kind of net zero and transitions like that, and supporting a lot of people, and also sustainably cost efficient, which is about basically spending not too much money on making sure you get things done, which is for me a really important engineering skill. You can make the best thing in the world, but if it's really expensive, then people can't afford it. Sometimes it's about making those compromises and thinking creatively about how you do that. So my job now is very different to before. As I said, I'm working now in the electricity network, but I'm doing a lot more in diversity and inclusion and supporting what we call vulnerable consumers. So vulnerable consumers are people that if something happens to them, they might struggle with the problem a little bit more than other people. So a really good example of this is, as I said, one of the main parts of my job is helping customers during power cuts. No one likes power cuts. If it's dark, the lights go out, you can't see, you can't watch the telly, you can't charge your phone. It's a real problem for everyone. No one's having fun. But some people might struggle a lot more than others. So you might have friends or family members who require maybe stair lifts to get up and down the stairs, or hoists to get in and out of bed. That can mean that if the electricity isn't working, they may not be able to go up or down the stairs. They might be trapped where they are, which is not pleasant at all. Or you get other people that say, parents with very young children, young babies especially need warm milk, and if you can't warm the milk up, it can be really upsetting for the baby. So how are you going to feed it? There's so many different problems people encounter that are particularly difficult. So one of my jobs is understanding who those people are and how we can offer that help so that they don't have as much of a struggle during power cuts. This can be from providing hot meals to people, either vouchers or literally driving out in a van to go and support them, or offering kind of custom help depending on exactly what they need, including taking generators to places like homes so that the homes can keep going, even if kind of the network is still down in the area. The other part of my job is called supporting people experiencing what's called fuel poverty. There's a technical definition of this, but basically it's when people really struggle to pay their energy bills. So that's gas and electricity. There can be a huge range of reasons that people struggle with this. And it can really affect basically the stress in people's lives. No one wants to worry about, as I said, having a power cut. And so they want to pay their bills to make sure that they can still have access to charging their phones, televisions, lights, cooking, or heat, especially if it's gas. In the winter, it can be really cold if your home's really cold and you can't afford to heat it. So there's a lot of people that struggle with that. So part of my job is understanding who those people are and how we can find them and offer help, whether it's kind of advice on how they can be more efficient with their energy, or supporting grants and funding to help maybe build something in their house that could help them more effectively afford their bills. So that's really important to me because especially at the moment, a lot of people are really struggling with the cost of their bills. And so there's lots of people that really need that help, and we're doing the best we can to help as many as we can and offer support. The final third part of my job is called No One Left Behind in the Transition to Net Zero. And as I said before, it's a time of change. There's a lot of things like electric vehicles or different kinds of heating, such as heat pumps. There's solar panels, there's wind farms. There's so many exciting things going on, but it's got to be for everyone, not just a few people. It shouldn't be that if you're rich enough to afford a Tesla, you can have an electric car, but no one else can. So what we're working with is doing different research and designing technology in new areas to help everyone be involved in the transition to net zero and not be prevented because of any kind of challenges they might be facing, anything about their situation, whether it's affordability or the type of home they live in, or any disabilities they might have. Everyone should have the right to transition to net zero. So it's really important to us to support that as well. So the cool thing is how we do it. And one of the other elements of my job, as I said, I love helping people, but I love having exciting challenges and coming up with creative ways to solve it. So one of the main ways we do it is using data. There's a huge amount of information there, and using data effectively is about understanding what's there, what you can do with it, and what it really means. So you can see a picture here. There's a tool we developed, and it's a picture that basically shows the percentage of the local population that's likely to be living in fuel poverty in each of those areas. So if it's blue, it's a smaller percentage of the population. It's about 5 to 10% of people, which is about 1 in 20 people you know to 1 in 10. Whereas you can see in some areas, there's these red patches, and that's a really high amount. That's about 30 to 35% of people that are struggling to pay their energy bills. And that's about a third of people. That's 1 in 3. That's a lot. So what we do is understand where these people live and why they might be struggling with it. You know, you can see this area here, there's lots of smaller things, and that's because there's lots of people living very close together. And it's in an area of London. So we can identify that area and go, oh, I wonder why those people in particular are struggling and what we can do to help. And that's where the tools come in. We can interpret that data and understand what we can do to help. So some of that could be, we look at the houses in the area and go, oh, they all have really poor insulation, which means that they've kind of got hollow walls or single glazed windows. So the house is really cold. So in winter, they have to pay even more money to try and heat the house and keep it warm, but so much of it basically escapes out of the walls and the windows because they're not very well insulated. So what we could do is help provide grants and install double glazed windows or better insulation on the walls, or maybe draft excluders by the doors. Lots of little tips, tricks, and investments to help insulate the house, because then they don't have to spend as much on their energy bill heating it up, because it's not escaping out into the air, it's staying in the house. And doing things like that can make all the difference to people's lives, because no one likes to be cold, especially not in the middle of winter if you're sat at home on your own. So doing that bit can really help people. One of the other areas we do in the innovation projects we run is the really important phrase of inclusion by design. And for me, that means you don't kind of think later when you see someone struggling to use something and go, oh no, I didn't think that they might try and use it that way. I guess we'll fix it. If you try and understand what you're building from the beginning and who's going to use it, as I said earlier, with transport, everyone uses it. So how can you do something clever with the design to make sure that everyone can use it? You know, whether someone's in a wheelchair or they can walk, or maybe they have something like a walking stick to help support them. How can you help them get on the bus? Lots of buses can be very low, so they line up to the pavement, or they have ramps. It's something that the bus was built with to ensure people can access it. So inclusion by design is thinking ahead and thinking, how can I help as many people as possible use whatever it is I'm designing and make sure it works for everyone? And that's one of the things kind of we do as our day-to-day job on all the different projects we're working on, is who's using it and how can we help them? So thank you very much for listening. That was my talk, and it's been really good sharing a bit of my life experience with you all.